So today's guest is Mike Caden. He is the CEO of Norhart. Today we have Mike, who is a property expert and entrepreneur, and we're going to talk to him about his journey and the business and where he sees the future of real estate. So welcome, Mike.
Oh, thank you for having me. This should be fun.
Yes, very much so. So Mike, tell us about a little bit about your business first off. Who is Norhart and what do you guys do?
Yeah, at Norhart, we build, design, and rent apartments, but really we're about driving down the cost of housing. Right now, we're already producing units at about 20 to 30% less than other developers, but imagine what that means someday. That means that someday your rent could be substantially less, right? It could be as much as half. Your mortgage payment could be half. Really, our dream is to solve America's housing affordability crisis and kind of make a better environment for us all.
Okay, excellent. That's good to know. And how did you get started?
Yeah, so my parents originally started the business and very small at that time. So they grew it up over time. And I remember my dad and us and our family adventure, we would go out to the local hardware store. We would pack on all the local supplies. We had like 8 carts full of stuff, filled it in my dad's trailer up to the sky, driving down the highway. I think it was maybe illegal, but it was a lot of fun. And we would build these buildings, very small buildings at the time. So I grew up with it. But by the time I went off to college, I didn't. I didn't really want much to do with the family business, even though my dad wanted me to join. And the reason that was is because I didn't want people to think it was given to me. So I had to wrestle with my own ego on that. Um, and deep down, what I realized is that I wanted to make some kind of meaningful, positive impact on the world. And I saw that we had this opportunity to take this small business and grow it to something much larger. So got past my own ego, jumped in, and my dad and I worked together for a little while, but it wasn't long after, and he passed away.
Sorry to hear.
And yeah, it was really tough. Um, but looking back at it, there was a degree at which it was a blessing because I didn't really know what I was doing. And see, that was the magic because I could start questioning everything, right? Like, why are we doing it this way? Why not go like that? There's nobody to come in and tell us, no, you can't do this. And for us in our industry in construction, it's so, I don't know, it's so stuck in its ways. I mean, if you look at the past 60 years, manufacturing has improved by 760%, agriculture 1,500%. In tech, it's way more, right? It's explosive. Do
Yeah,
you have any guess what construction has done?
tell me.
10%, essentially
Really?
nothing. It's
Wow.
awful, right? So if we just take the lessons learned from these other industries and apply it to our own, we can have massive impact. And so that's what we started doing and started down that journey to transform this industry.
Excellent. And what areas, or should I say, states do you sort of, or cities do you operate in?
Yeah, right now we have our buildings in Minnesota, although we have
Mhm,
manufacturing facilities also in Wisconsin. We're
mhm.
expanding down to Texas, not far from you. And then we've got manufacturing facilities being built up in Mexico as well.
Fantastic. And where do you see the future of affordable housing?
Hmm. I think the key there is driving down the cost of construction. Because unless we solve that problem, you know, affordable housing is traditionally solved by having government come in and pay developers to cap their rents, basically, which works, but you're just moving money from one pocket to another pocket. You're not really solving the underlying issues. So unless we solve the underlying issues, I just see it being stagnant, frankly.
Right.
But the key there is to solve construction. And so if you can bring down the construction costs, you can solve affordable housing in a way that's maybe half the cost that it is today.
Right. And when you say self-construction, do you mean labor cost or just or production?
It's the whole thing.
Mhm.
It's the cost of materials, it's the cost of labor. You know, when we first jumped into it, one of the first things that we did was take all the different trades and bring them under one roof. So in construction, typically your owner is a different company than your developer who designs the site, who's a different company than your general contractor who coordinates all of the construction, who's a different company yet again from your plumber and your HVAC and your electrician and your supplier and your manufacturers. It's like, wow. If a construction company were to produce cars, you'd have a different company installing the window, a different company installing the the door, and a different company installing the wheels. And then the wheel company would come out and be like, I'm sorry, I can't be out here this week. I got too busy with another project. You'd be stopped for an entire week. And then when they did come out, they'd be upset because they could only work on one car at a time. You're like, dude, this just doesn't make any sense. So you bring it all under one roof and you're already improving efficiencies just by that alone. But once it's under one roof, we can start applying techniques that have been widely used in manufacturing. So we actually have a partnership with Toyota. One of the first things we did with them is look at their assembly line. They produce a car every 55 seconds. I said, okay, can we do what they're doing to get the kind of efficiency? So right now we're actually producing an entire apartment unit every 5 hours. And we think we can get that down to much less. So you take their concept of an assembly line and you take a building and you break it up into its components. So for us, an area or a batch is less than 1 unit. But every 5 hours, the team basically moves from 1 unit to the next unit, to the next unit, to the next unit. And the team behind them, like the electricians, will move right behind them in that chain. And so by doing that, you can take a project that was 15 months and drop it down to 9 months. So there are a lot of techniques like that that you start applying to this industry to fix it.
Excellent. Excellent. So typically, how big are your units?
So an apartment unit itself is like 1,000 square feet is sort of the average. It ranges between like 700 and 2,500. The buildings we're building at about 350 units per building, roughly.
Right. Across how many locations, if I may ask?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. We've been growing so fast, doubling in size, that we're producing about 500 units per year, but we only own about 1,000. So
Okay.
that is only a handful, like about a dozen buildings that's spread out over.
Right, right. Okay. So, and the reason why the ownership is quite low, I'm assuming, is because you actually didn't sell them on at the end. Is that correct?
I know we actually keep them. The ownership is quite small because we're doubling the size of production every year.
Okay.
Last year was 250. The year before that was 125. The year before that was 50. And
Okay.
so, yeah, next
Okay.
year we'll be at 1,000, even though we'll have 1,500 units, right?
Okay. Yeah. So with the sort of now your tenants, they come in and they rent these buildings. They have low rent for a period of time. Did they then have the opportunity to maybe purchase in future?
Hmm. So those are things we're actually looking into.
Mhm.
We're actually launching an investment platform, which is sort of the first little step into that.
Mhm.
I can imagine a world down the line where some of the options become owning a piece of your unit or your building in some way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but it's not there today.
Okay, and the reason why I ask you that is it's pretty big in the UK, and it's been evolving ever since. And it started off with the local authorities allowing those that lived in local they call it council housing to purchase their real estate. So you can imagine if your property was worth 100,000, you were purchasing it for like 20,000 or 25,000, which was actually giving people a responsibility and the capability to own. And as you've seen property prices fly in London, a lot of these ex-council local authority homes were purchased for peanuts, but now they're worth millions and millions of dollars. Um,
Oh,
so
that's cool. I'll have to look into that.
yeah, yeah, definitely. It was, but they changed the scheme, and over the years, it's evolved as housing has evolved. And what they now do, and I think maybe what you guys are considering is you part own the building, so you may buy 5% of the building, but then you rent the other 95%. And each year,
Mm.
however long you stay in the property, you're able to buy a percentage till you can thus afford a mortgage, and that is given people, especially nurses, doctors, police, people in the fire services, and vets, the opportunity to then own something, whilst they're growing their families and so forth.
That's fascinating. So do they own, like, if they're in a unit and they're paying, say, $1,500 a month for their unit, if they
Yeah.
want to buy 1% of that unit, do they have to pay that on top of their rent, or do they get that as just part of their rent?
So you go in and you buy similar to buying a house out here. You put in a percentage. So if you're buying 5% of the property, they'll work out. Let's say, for argument's sake, let's say 5% is 100 grand. You'd
Mm.
pay a percentage of that 100 grand, which is a deposit to the bank. We'll call it 20,000. So your rent will no longer be 1,500. It'll be 1,000 because you pay 500 to the bank and then 1,000 or 600 to your landlord. And so as you start to grow your income, or as the equity appreciates, you're able to either cash out on that portion of your equity and shift it to your side and vice versa. And it's a really good scheme, especially if you are coming from a low income background initially. It's a real easy way in the door to ownership, and they reserve that, or they promote that a lot for key workers, your nurses, your vets, your fire service, but they are actually opening it out to a lot of other people, especially now there is no local authority housing, especially in London.
Hmm, that is really interesting. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, got you thinking, right?
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, but it can be challenging as well, because what you got to think about is if you have, let's say, a building of 12 apartments and only 30% are owners and the other 70% are tenants, they can come from all walks of life. I call these apartments, houses upon houses, stacks and stacks.
Hmm.
So you then may have a challenge where the owners might be, wanting to keep the building a certain type of way, but because your tenants don't really care because they don't own it, they can have a dog who's trashing the lobby every 5 minutes, etc. And so it also can prove a problem. So you got to be careful when you're getting into those types of purchases, but at the same time they can be very lucrative as well, because you get a block of 8 or 9, and if you're an investor you could just buy it all and just rent it out and start earning some lucrative income.
Hmm. So does the investor buy out 8 of them and then re-rent it out?
If there has been known cases for that to actually happen, and it's on the market, because what now is happening is a lot of people had bought real estate in London through the council. They call it the council right to buy. Now they resell it on. So if you've got someone or a block that's selling 3 of these units, you go in and you buy all 3 units, and hopefully you can now start, petitioning to the others to sell. And if they sell, you've got 8, and away you go. That's your first block.
Hmm. Are the buildings originally owned by the government or the council, or is it owned by private individuals?
Now there are some that are owned by private individuals, but what the council had were a lot of, after the war, we had to sort of rebuild
Yeah.
countries, and they built housing back then. As you probably know, they were actually luxurious units for people to live in after the war, and now I think you guys call them, use the term projects,
Hmm.
to say the least. And so they were owned by local authority, but they've sold them on to these people, and these people who have bought are actually selling them on to other investors. So you can be lucky, you can win, but also you can get some private houses which aren't in massive block projects as well. Um, so it's a give and take in that sector on our side, but it's interesting to see or hear what you guys are doing, because for us, we always hear the horror stories about there's no housing in the US, and
Yeah.
we see pictures of Skid Row and um, medical care, and so by driving down the cost of housing in the US, what advantages or benefits do you think you as a business are giving back to the community?
Hmm. The biggest is to drive down the cost within people's pocketbooks, right? Because
Right.
typically people spend 30 to 40% of their income on housing. If that becomes 15 or 20%, like, how much better will your life be as a result of that? Now,
Mm,
it's important noting though, our apartments today are all at market rent. No, that's intentional. Our
mhm,
strategy long term is to take the profits we earn on each project and push it back into the the system, the capital required to build an infrastructure to build buildings to drive down the
Right.
cost. And our hope is long term, over the course of a decade or two, to produce so many units, it changes the supply and demand curve. So that
Right.
more units are being provided to market, which drives down the cost for everyone. And so that's how you solve it sustainably long term. If we just built a handful of buildings and just lowered the rents on those buildings, it's great for those few residents who get access to that, but it doesn't impact most of Americans. And we're hoping to solve it for most of Americans.
Sure. And as you scale, I mean, won't you encounter problems? I mean, if you come to Scottsdale, for example, rents are units are quite high, expensive. Rents are quite high. If you move into somewhere like Bellevue, Seattle, it's very expensive. How do you kind of see you being able to solve that problem in other states other than where you're located?
Yeah, so we are currently expanding into Texas, and scale brings a lot of problems.
Yeah.
It's not easy to solve. The the real root of solving that ultimately is having an amazing team. So we
Hmm.
fight hard to find literally the world's best people. And that's not an exaggeration. That's actually the goal. We will fly people in from other states to come work here during the week and fly them home on the weekend because they're the best in the world at what they do, their little niche.
Okay.
What we really need to do is you have to build out the problem solving capability of the team because every point of growth, we just encounter new problems. And I don't know
Mm.
what tomorrow's problems will look like. I know today's problems, but I don't know tomorrow's problems. But what I do know is that when you have a high enough caliber team that are capable of solving a vast array of problems, they unlock doors and they solve things for you that you didn't know could be solved. And that's how I think about it,
Mm.
in order to solve challenges that we're not yet encountering.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And just sort of in our business, our startup Swiftly, I had the same challenge. I'm
Mm,
based in London. Um, Pandemic virtually almost killed our business. We had to relaunch in North America. I know the US, but I've never done business in the US. And so having to build a brand new team was probably is and has been probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, because the temperaments are slightly different. And
oh yeah.
you know I've got my creative director based in LA, and then I've got my colleague out in Ohio, East Coast and the West Coast, and then I'm in the middle now. How do we get each person to meet at the same time consistently, but also work on one project and ensure that this project finishes on time? And it's not easy, so I feel your pain, but the greatest joy is to see the end result. um,
Yeah.
and once you see that, it makes everything else worth it. So I totally understand where you're coming from. But with your homes, as we move into more smart technology, I mean, this building that I'm in, we have no keys. I just have my phone, and sometimes I get a bit nervous because I feel that the door's unlocked. um, do you envisage yourself getting a bit smarter? And if so, what kind of tech would you be looking to install in your homes to be more sustainable?
Yeah. So there's we're really thinking about elevating the lifestyle of people. And so what's kind of interesting is you can go down the tech first approach and and we'll talk about the tech in a moment, but if you focus just on the tech but you don't think about the end experience, you can create something that's kind of interesting tech wise but it makes no impact or even a negative impact on the resident. And I have lived it. I've done that. My degree is in computer science, so I love technology.
Excellent.
But we think first about what is the experience of that resident. We think about things like community. We think about human interaction. We think about like design and like how do you design the space in a way that's optimal to your life. And then the last part of that is technology. So the way I like to think about technology is how can we remove as many little pain points out of your life as possible, right? So sometimes the tech isn't all that exciting. It's like an online application process where you can get approved in 2 minutes or less. Traditionally in apartments, it's a long, drawn out, multi-day process, and sometimes it's on paper, right? Like,
Yes.
but that's a friction point for somebody. Or an online portal that allows you to do everything, all the interactions you want to do with that leasing company, not have to talk to a human, right? It's not exciting, but it removes the friction. Now, maybe some more of the exciting things we talked about, the locks and allowing things like your Apple Watch to open all the doors in the building, just the smart home tech, which is pretty fun, or utility technology and be able to see like how much energy usage you have at any given moment. So those are all things that we either have or are working on as well.
Excellent. So your homes can and will be connected.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll be surprised if they weren't. From a man that studied computer science, myself too. It's even though you don't actually work in the tech industry directly, you still have this passion and love for technology that you try
Oh
to
yeah.
include it in your walks of life as you move. So tell me, what do you think about Airbnb, short-term housing, rental accommodation? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I think it's great. We actually use that in our own buildings. And so when we build out a building, most of it's for rent, but depending on the market, there'll be actually a handful or many units that will allocate to an Airbnb kind of environment. So um, we're using it and I like it. I know there's been concern out there like our Airbnb taking over
Mm,
traditional housing. Is that a danger for people? And for us, we just want to provide the right end product for people, and we'll solve that danger in the long term by producing enough units.
mhm. Okay, but so when you say Airbnb taking over housing, I sort of see it as a landlord. I bring someone into my home, and in UK they've changed the rules. Before you could just serve them a Section 21 or Section 8 after a couple of months, and then you know go to court and they leave. Now it's a year plus drawn out process, and once you decide to move a tenant out of your property, if they feel bitter, they stop paying and you got to pay the
Mm,
mortgage. So you got $1,500 extra roughly to pay every month, plus the legal fees, plus there's no guarantee they're going to be leaving the home. So it's very expensive or can be. And I think that governments are, not thinking about us as owners and the
mm,
responsibilities that we have, but they're really sort of thinking about the tenants in the home. Yes, tenants should have rights. I totally agree. But at the same time, at what cost? So I like the short-term housing model, but I think that it can be improved. So I think there
mm,
should be better protections again in for us as owners, because if Joe Bloggs comes to your apartment and he has a party and he trashes the place, and £500 or $500 deposit will not do it. There needs to be a better relationship. So I think that these short-term platforms should be maybe having conversations with us and finding out what our pain points are, what we would really like to see them do, and not sort of just a one app fits everybody type of scenario. And I think at this point in time, it's really very is it consumer led? It's led by them
mm.
on the other side and not by from the business. There's no real protection. So I mean, that being said, in my long-winded ways, I totally agree with what you've said, but at the same time, I think we need to revisit the way we do short-term housing, and maybe have a more corporate model versus
Mm.
individuals. Because as businesses, you then have, like hotels, you then have a little bit more rights to say, right, it's checkout time. There you go. At the moment, a lot of these new landlords or property owners or arbitrage guys finding themselves in a little bit of stick. Have you seen these issues yourself?
For evictions, at least in the state of Minnesota, we are very well acquainted with that process, and we can get people out in about 60 to 75 days. But are you saying that you're having problem evicting people that come in to establish an Airbnb unit?
We do. We do.
Really? What's your
Yeah.
experience with that?
So you've got to really just have approach it subtly. You've got to really put some measures and mechanism in place. I mean, for my Airbnb, I have tools, and I have locks, auto locks, and I have the cleaners go in at that particular point in time. But if you do have someone who says they're not leaving and you call the police, it becomes a civil matter in the UK, at least
Oh,
sometimes. and so they don't want to get involved. And you've got to then call a security company. So you need to have all of these systems in place. So when the security comes out, then they leave. But it should just be, well, leave the property, or you call the authorities. The authorities should say, well, please go. But it doesn't always work that way.
Sure.
Um, yeah. And I'm guessing you haven't had that problem on your side yet.
Not on the Airbnb. People leave after that, at least for us.
Hmm.
But yeah, once a person's a full on tenant, we have a pretty aggressive. If they're not paying, we have a pretty aggressive policy to get them out.
Okay, okay. And would you, and this is just for sort of listeners as well, because you have, a pretty large portfolio of units for rental, and I know there's quite a lot of people looking for units to become Airbnb landlords, etc., as we see on social media and in the news. Is that something that you do consider as an organization, or is it just for yourselves?
Yeah, so we don't let people sublease out the units for any reason, including Airbnb, um, mainly because we want to make sure that we're having the right end experience for our customers. And so if a third party comes in and Airbnbs out the unit and they give that end customer a bad experience, it could
Mhm.
come back negatively on us. And so
Right.
we don't want to get into that mixture where there's someone between us and the customer.
Mhm. Excellent. And we've talked about experience in this conversation a lot. And just to go back to what we talked about using smart technology
Mm.
and connected homes, but also what other experiences do you think makes it important for one to feel welcomed in a unit or a building like yours?
I think it always comes back to people. If you have great people
Hmm.
on your staff, they
Hmm.
make those experiences. And so
Yeah.
it's the little things. It's the hellos in the morning, that engagement, the eye to eye contact, the
Hmm.
knowing your name, and when your pet's birthday is, so you can give the pets a pet a bone. Um, it's 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 just like just yesterday they decorated out one of the elevators for like a tropical theme because it was a cold day out, right? To like just have fun with things. I think one of the interesting like major shifts that's happening in today's economy is the focus more on remote work, right? Or this hybrid model, where places like Google used to go to this corporate campus that was fun and bubbly and all this crazy fun stuff you can do and eat and engage with. Great campus, by the way, if you ever get a chance to go out there. But now that people are working on site less, maybe only a couple days a week, or in some cases none at all, their home becomes the only outlet for that kind of social environment. So can we create some of that experience in the apartment? And so we have in our newer buildings, we're actually building out large co-working spaces and events and things of that nature to support a feeling of community and camaraderie that
Mhm.
you can now get at home rather than just in your workplace.
Excellent, excellent. And that's very important. And, in this building here, when we were looking for it, one of my biggest things, my question was, do they have concierge?
Mm,
We run a concierge business, but do they have concierge on site? Because I think it's very important what you said, knowing your dog's name, when is it your birthday? And these events here, which bring the community together, because we are working less and less in the office, and being able to sort of engage with those in the apartment buildings outside, whether it's a happy hour, wine and cheese, it really sort of takes you away from, it gives you another outlet because you're not
yeah.
going into the office. And that experience there, especially here, is something that is priceless. You have all the amenities, and it's very important. So, I mean, I suppose I asked you that because if you're doing it, when people think about affordable housing, they just think, oh, it's, chipboard and, low cost kitchen and some a bed to sleep, but they don't really think that perhaps, which is why I'm probing, it can actually be a whole 360 experience. And, there you go, you've said it. And I really hope
Y-
that. Mhm.
Oh, you're right with the affordable housing. We don't even use that term internally. We're trying to solve America's housing affordability issue, but we're not
Yeah,
affordable housing. In fact,
yeah.
our properties are some of the nicest in the state. Our latest project is valued at $100 million, right? It's a really nice property.
Yeah. And that's really it. I mean, sometimes buildings, I mean, even when you're buying new homes, I've bought quite a few and they're overpriced. They're overpriced for a reason because, you're paying a 20, 30% premium, but they're not actually worth that. Can the developer, you know, reduce that 30%, maybe take a 10% margin instead and provide everyone a better experience within that community? Yes, they can. And
Mhm.
if people like you continue to do this, especially with the way ownership is changing now, because people aren't buying anymore because interest rates are going up, but also in the UK, we do, unlike in the US. So the US has a slightly different model. The US, a mortgage broker will look at your income and say, right, you earn 100 grand, you spend 1,000, you can afford to buy a house and pay 5,000 a month. So that house could either be $1 million or it could be a $5 million home. As long as it's 5 grand to the mortgage lender, you can afford either or. Whereas in the UK, it's slightly different. They say, right, you earn 100 grand, we'll give you 4 times your income, go find a house for 400,000. And now who's going to buy a house, be able to buy a house just about in London for £400,000 um, with a 25% deposit? So people have to rent.
Mm.
And I think it's similar over this side of the pond as well. And so when we have businesses and people like you creating these communities with reasonable rents where the I call them new school entrepreneurs or freelancers, because a lot of people are now becoming freelance and contractors, can actually afford and still enjoy and have a place to live and enjoy life. I think it's a great thing. And, I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more of your work. And hopefully one day I'll make it out to your side of the United States and get to see the buildings in life as well.
Yeah, that'd be so much fun.
Yeah, definitely. I've actually enjoyed this conversation. But before we go, someone going into real estate has a little bit of money, whether it's an Airbnb startup or an actual person who wants to buy a home. What three things would you tell them that they should do and look out for?
Mm. The first thing is I would say is make sure this is something you want to do, right? Like, is it something you're passionate and excited about? If it's just a kind of way to try to make some more money, but it's not, you're not actually passionate about real estate, it's gonna burn you. On my first house that I ever owned myself, uh, I remember the late nights and the weekends of having to clean the junk, then go out there and plunge the toilet, and all of those issues that you face. You're now the maintenance person, you're the leasing person, you're everything to making
Mhm,
that business function. And so make sure it's something you want to do,
mhm,
because there are other avenues that you can invest your money and earn a rate of return, which doesn't require work. Uh, but if it's something you want to do and something you're passionate about, then I would say uh, jumping into like buying a house and renting it out, I think is a fantastic way to get started. Make sure the numbers work. Make sure you get the rate of return you're looking for. Do enough research into the different properties. There's a whole spectrum of properties out there to be effective in. Um, and then as you grow, I would say make sure to find great people, right? So if you're going to 5 units, to 10 units, to 20 units, have great people. Don't skimp on that. Your life only gets harder if you don't have great people.
excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much, Mike. It's been wonderful talking to you, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Yeah, thanks. It was great being here.
Right. Likewise.